Welcome to the Lean by Design podcast, the show that explores the relationship between people and workflow design within the life sciences industry. I'm your host, Lawrence Wong, and my co-host is Oscar Gonzalez. Join us as our guests tell inspiring stories that have shaped their careers and deliver tips to help you work smarter and become lean by design. We're back for episode 6, and Oscar and I are here today with our special guest, Jon Holden. He's a management consultant at Alvarez & Marshall, and he's also a dear friend of mine. Welcome to the show, Jon.
Thanks. Welcome. Excited to be here. Let's do it.
So I guess we can start off by talking about a little bit about what you do, and could you describe kind of at a high level like what a management consultant does, and then what a day in the life looks like for you?
Yeah. So I would say in general, a management consultant is brought in usually when something's going wrong in a company and they need something changed. And it can vary widely what that is. So I'm specifically within the manufacturing space, but it could be, an issue with something within their financial team or their budget for the year, or it could be something on a shop floor. Like they need help creating a process on a shop floor or fixing a process that's broken. So it can kind of vary widely, but it's essentially change management and changing processes for the better or creating them.
Yeah, I know before we started recording, you talked a little bit about like the private equity focus. So for our listeners that are not familiar with what private equity is, could you kind of give a short description of what that is?
Yeah, so basically private equity, it's kind of like an owner comes in, buys a company, fixes it up, and then sells it for more money, hopefully. So it's similar to, like I said to you guys, flipping a house. Like you find a house that has good potential, but there's issues with it. You go in, you buy it, you fix it up, and then you look to resell it for more. So it's a similar concept.
Right.
So it's Chip and Joanna Gaines with a suit and tie.
It's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I could imagine that there's probably a set of unique challenges in that type of work versus some of the stuff that like we do. So, we usually have a little bit longer engagement with some of the clients that we have. And, you're placed there, but you're there maybe like 3 to 6 months or even close to a year where you're understanding, what the operation is. And then you're understanding where the gaps and bottlenecks are, and you're helping them redesign and optimize that specific process. But I think when you talk about, changing some of those processes for, let's say an acquisition or a merger of some sort, there may be some unique circumstances there. So, what things do you see on your side of the work that is unique?
Yeah, I would say the unique thing I like about moving now to private equity is there's just a huge sense of urgency. Like something that I didn't really feel when I was just in general industry at General Electric. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants change, even in industry, like the management team always wants to improve. But there's just way more of a sense of urgency within private equity because usually each company they buy will be a part of a fund, like a bigger set of collection of companies. And they try to close that out within 10 years of starting it, start to finish. So usually a company could be held as short as 5 years. And usually a 5-year timeline is what they like model towards or look towards. So when you come in, you could be in year 3. They might be trying to sell in a year or two. So there's like there's just very high urgency to get any of those changes that they want done completed, especially if you're coming in to fix a broken process that wasn't working. Like they purchased this company or this house and they wanted to fix something in it. And they couldn't get it fixed, and now they're getting closer to the time they want to sell it. You come in, and there's like a very, very just high need to fix that quickly. So that's what I like about it. There's some extra pressure. Teams are usually more willing to change. They see that what they've tried isn't working. They're maybe just like more desperate to see a solution that actually works, including the people on the floor, like the shop floor.
So Jon, I'm curious as to how that communication plays out in terms of when you're asked to come on board, and I'm assuming that you have some assessment of, when you look at a house that can go through a new design, a new, additions or renovations, you're going to see what the house is valued at. How do you value a company with workflows that may not be super tight? For example, usually in my mind, that companies are going to tell you, here's our assets, here's a number of people, here's a pipeline that we have, here's the platform that we have. They're not going to get into the nitty gritty of, well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, unless that comes out in the due diligence of, hey, how often are you guys successful with X? How do you use that information to assess a change in value to the company? So if you guys come in and there's a department that has a bad workflow, how do you assess the improvement of that into what now the company is valued at?
Yeah. So I guess there's a few things. Some of the projects we do are strictly to help a private equity firm evaluate a company and see if they want to purchase it. In those cases, you might be able to do a site visit or two, so you get a day on the floor, but it's very high level. You're not going to be able to meet or talk with any of the like hourly folks. You're just going to be with a management team walking around, and they're going to kind of like hide the skeletons in the corner so you don't see them.
So you're in that group of like 8 guys with suits, everyone with a briefcase, just walking through the floor. Okay, I got it. Now I know. I will look for you if I ever see that.
Exactly. So in those situations, really, I mean, the easiest way is to look through the data and see if they have KPIs, like typical KPIs like OEE that kind of track your efficiency through processes.
Yep.
It's not always the best marker, but it just depends on the scenario and what data you get. So that's usually a good way to look at it. OEE, sometimes looking at their inventory, seeing how they're managing, because that's another great way to see where something's broken in a process, is where the stuff's piling up within that process chain. Yeah. And then like, I guess just the utilization of the people is another one that we would look at. So that's kind of if you only get high level information. If you're going in to actually do a performance improvement where they've already purchased the company, you will go in, you'll have full access. So you'll get all the data, you get to go on the floor. And then at that point, I still think you look at the higher level metrics to get a gut feel for how everything's working. But then you just go and spend as much time as you can on the floor with the people who actually like live and breathe it every day.
So you almost become an internal employee.
Yes, exactly. Like one of the projects I just completed was 6 months, and I was essentially an interim manager for a building, like a first and second shift, and setting up everything like wing to wing from front end to back end. In that case, like you just go talk to the people on the floor, kind of get a gut feel for how everything's moving around. And like I said, there's visual cues like the inventory piling up, and just talking to them about where their pain points are. I would say that's the easiest way to get started. And then to your point about how do you value the changes, I guess the easiest ways there would be if you can find a throughput increase, you can usually translate that into dollars, which is what private equity people like to see is, how could this improve our cash? How could it improve our P&L? Like, so that we have a higher EBITDA or earnings essentially per quarter. So that's usually the way we would translate it. If you're communicating it to manufacturing people though, you would just talk like output. Maybe you need less people for this process. You can allocate them to other things if you already reached the output you need for customer.
Yeah, I feel like there's a immense importance on like, being able to speak the same language when you're, especially in like manufacturing environment, and being able to align with the client on like what the expectations are for what that metric you're improving. But I also could see a place where you don't necessarily get all the data that you need. And so sometimes you're having to make these, I would say, educated estimates on what you believe is happening. And I think what you mentioned before about being on the floor and being able to observe and talk to people really helps a lot with improving whatever that process is. So, for clients that you've worked with that are manufacturing focused, are there any specific things that you would look for when you start? Because it could be very overwhelming with all these different unit operations going on, with all these people that are working on this process from like wing to wing, as what you talked about. And where do you start? I guess is where I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I would start, usually we would start with kind of a tour day one, and then a high level process map, if they have it, right, of how everything's actually working. So then you get kind of a bearing of who's doing what, how do things actually move through the process. And I would say that's really where you start. And if they don't have that, then you basically go and make one. So you would go make, if you know a value stream map, it's basically just wing to wing from input of material or whatever whatever's input into this in this scenario. And then kind of through the process steps, and then typically try to time it, but you can't always get there depending on how much time you have with the client. Like if it's a 2-week sprint, it'll be higher level, but typically it'd be good to see the time of how long it takes through each step. So then you can kind of go target which step is taking the longest. You need to break that step up. Is there a more efficient way to do it? But that's usually how we kind of ground ourselves in looking at how they're doing the process today. And it's important when you get that map as well that you try to match it up if that's really truly what is happening. Because oftentimes you'll get a map and they're saying, we're doing these 5 things in a row. And then you go out there and they're doing maybe A, B, they're not doing C at all, or they're doing D completely inefficiently, not at all how they're saying they're doing it. So that's something you immediately have to kind of fact check to see how things are truly working current state.
This is a great segue and great example of we just had this conversation on a podcast that's going to come out just before this one, where conflict a lot of times you have to look at those workflows and address the people that are within that workflow, because in some cases, even though there's an SOP and what have you, and this is the standard that we shoot for, when you actually start to dig into the details, people are just cutting corners because they have, timelines and deadlines, and they're not actually thinking that it's basically the same. Well, just, minor changes in your quality, when you stack those up over time, it's, you're multiplying that error. It's not just being incremental additions. And I think people sometimes tend to, ignore that the reason why there's some sort of SOP or some sort of workflow or work instruction or guidance that has been provided is usually because something happened to cause the need to create that. So to avoid it, you should probably follow it. And if you have a problem with it, you should look at improving it.
Yeah, I think the
Agreed.
Go ahead, John.
Well, the other thing I was going to say on that is I agree with all of that. And on top of that, you also need to look at the why behind why they're going around some of these corners. Like sometimes
yes.
Human nature, it's the easiest way to do something, they're going to do it. So maybe there's a better solution to do it, or maybe for safety reasons, we decide not to do that easier route because it's a safety issue or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always good to evaluate too the why behind that and understand that when you're designing a process that people are going to try to take the easiest path. It's just human nature.
Yeah, and it's funny because we talk about sometimes that I think there's a book that's called The Lazy Genius, because lazy people are typically trying to find the easiest way to do something when it's constructively done, right. When it is done well. If you're just being lazy and not doing, the process that needs to be done, then obviously you're gonna have more errors. Your variation in your end product is going to be, increasing over time. So yeah, a lot of good points. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to add on and say, the terminology that we used in the previous episode was, there's a standard operating procedure, but there are standard behaviors behind those steps that are in the procedure, right? And so one of the hardest things to change is human behavior and how they do something. And usually you'll come across some resistance, either from the individual or even the team as a whole, because they may not feel that they are doing anything that is wrong in their perspective. So I'm interested because, you probably come across many new people on all these different projects. So how do you kind of build that trust and demonstrate your intention with improving a process that is, the overall idea is to improve the output of the whole process, and not so much like, hey, your behavior sucks and like we want you to change it. How do you go about navigating that?
Yeah, it's a good thing to bring up. It's funny that you brought this up too, because to me, for a consultant, you can have all the technical skill in the world, but the hardest part is learning the nuance of being able to handle change management. And that doesn't necessarily take any technical acumen. It just, you have to understand how people are going to behave when you come in somewhere like that. And what I find works really well is not coming in too strong. And I've learned that by experience of coming in too strong.
Trial by
and I
fire.
think like learning the process with the people and then understanding their pain points, like essentially trying to look at it from their point of view and how they're seeing the process is the easiest way to gain trust. And then another like quick way to get trust as well is just to spend more time out there with them. Like I'll give an example. For that 6-month interim management project, one of the weekends, everyone had to come in and work for a Saturday. And it was probably my first month on the project. And I decided to stay just that weekend and come in. And I didn't necessarily have much I had to do or contribute there, but it was just after that, they realized that I was there to help them, really, like help them achieve what they needed to achieve, and that I was there to support them. So anything you can do along that front that's like a quick win for the team to show that you're there with them, you understand where they're coming from, it's easier then to get them to buy into your changes.
Yeah, so you mentioned like right before that you learned by like trial through fire. Could you kind of describe what that moment was and then how you grew from it?
Yeah, the one I was specifically thinking of was before the current company I'm at, when I was at General Electric, and I was basically on an internal consulting team where you would parachute in for 4 months, move to the location, go help fix a process. And in this case, there are just always broken processes. Like you're going to a plant that's the worst plant in, let's say, the US, for instance, and they say, go fix it. So this one I came into is my first project that was manufacturing based for this GE program I was in. And I came in and just kind of immediately was talking to some of the hourly folks and learning about what they're doing. But I just started throwing out like, why can't you guys just do this? Or why can't, you change this process to be like this? And it just comes off strong for a couple of reasons. One, you just came in, so it's day one. You don't even know the full process yourself. And there's probably things that you're missing. So when you're making these recommendations, you're hurting your own credibility, essentially. Because they're like, well, we can't do that because this machine is unreliable. It breaks down every other day. So, like we can't just like pour more input into there from material perspective because these machines are always broken. So like just some suggestions like that when you come in, it just hurts your credibility with the hourly team. And I had to go in and build that up again. And so that's actually one of the first times I sat down with that team for 3 days and just watched what they were doing, documenting it with them, talking with them, going through the issues that they were seeing. And then we did end up getting to a point where we made a change together, but it took a lot more time than if I would have just done it the way that I do it now, which would be more like observing, asking questions, and then kind of build it after the fact versus just coming in with an idea and plan ahead of time and just assuming that that's going to be correct.
I think what you're describing too is, asking questions is one thing, but asking the right questions is also something that takes a lot of practice. And what you're describing is something that I dealt with myself as I've gone through my career. And you mentioned a question that you used to come to when you would have these engagements of, well, why can't you just do this in your process? And you're already kind of putting the fault on the person that you could have just done this and solve it, rather than you can get the same information by asking, what are the things that you have tried to do in this process that have not worked? And then you could then assess, oh, have you ever considered XYZ? Rather than, why didn't you just do this? Like, hello, dum-dum. That's not the and when I say that, it makes me think of the little green Martian in Flintstones. It was always, hello, dum-dum. But it's a really delicate space to be in, because I can imagine that when you go in, everyone's kind of on pins and needles. Like, there's a company that was hired to come here and tell us, the experts, to do something differently. Why should we even pay attention to them? Because they just want to get rid of us in the end. I can imagine that that's a little bit of a complex feeling when you're going into a space for the first time.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I think there's just a perception when you come in as well, like you mentioned, that you're kind of there to either eliminate them or, change something. And it can be scary for anyone. If someone came in and wanted to change something in my job, it'd be same thing. You'd get pushback from me as well. It's just hard for people to change. So I think disrupting that, and they know you're coming in to disrupt that, makes things difficult. And that's why at least from the perspective where we're coming in, it's easier to try and take an approach where you are kind of siding with them and getting their point of view right away.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Thank you to our sponsor, Perna Communications, a Boston-based digital communications firm for life sciences, healthcare, and mental health companies. Life science companies have an important story to tell, but it's not always easy with the industry jargon. Lauren and her team turn your technical talk into compelling content that feels authentic to your brand and resonates with your audience. If you need help with your digital content or copywriting, visit laurenperna.com to learn more about how they can tell your company's story. Yeah, I think there's kind of something you could probably say about suspending your ego and like your judgment on whatever the process is so that you can actually improve it by kind of aligning yourself with what the challenges are that particular group is facing, right? I think if you're coming in here going, I have to ask these questions because I have to demonstrate that I know all this stuff, I think that leaves a really bad taste in their mouth. And also the way that they would look at you is like what you said before, right? You just got here. Like, how would you know anything that's going on? And based on the questions that you're asking, now the judgment that you're putting on them, they will now reverse that and put it on you and say, oh, this person is coming in here to do, A, B, and C and doesn't know like X, Y, and Z. To that end, how do you, I guess, as a consultant, because you're going to these new teams or companies, obviously there's a lot of like work that you do with your clients, but I would imagine that there's also some internal work that you do with yourself where, I'm imagining that you didn't, come out and go, hey, my ego is suspended. Like as soon as I walk in the door, like it probably took some time to develop that skill. Could you talk a little bit about how you've grown, since becoming a consultant and how that's progressed?
Yeah, I would say the biggest change and the most important change is just being humble, which is, as you said, being humble is an important part of it. You may have seen several instances of a similar process before, but there's always going to be nuances to everything. So the thing I like about consulting is you learn something new all the time. Like I'm going from a potential like a juice concentrate company to a heavy industrial business, so the range is very wide. So you're learning a lot, and staying humble is just like a key aspect of that to be successful, I think. And so as far as growing through that, I think it helps just to I kind of approach each day knowing that you're going to learn something new. There's going to be something that you didn't know that they're going to teach you. You might be able to teach them things as well. But I think it's just important to come in knowing that mindset each day. And I think really I started trying to grow that after that first instance in that GE program, which was similar as far as from a consulting aspect. It was essentially the internal consulting. I think A&M for where I'm at now, it's a core value for as part of their 6 core values. So it's very important. It's something that I always try to keep in mind. And I would say the key times, the critical time really is the first couple weeks while you're still like learning the ways of the new company or the new management team, and you're trying to like learn about the business. That's really when you should be trying to spend all your time learning, or most of your time learning. And then once you learn and absorb some of that information, that's when you index to kind of the other side where you're helping build up recommendations.
You mentioned that speaking of the recommendations, you were mentioning that in some cases projects might be a little bit on the shorter end of 5 years, but typically you'll find something in the neighborhood of up to 10 years. How can you talk a little bit about how how much time do you take? When I think about planning something big, you got the 80-20 planning, 80%, 20% execution. How much planning and organizing do you guys do up front? Because 10 years is a little bit of a long window, and things can happen in the middle of those 10 years. The market could do what it's doing, or, potentially the assets, get hijacked by another company that's doing something similar. How do you continue to drive toward that, year 10 goal of having all of these things in line and fixed while dealing with the uncertainty year over year?
Yeah, I think because we're not usually in there for that long since we're helping them, you need to understand their vision as well. So if this is more of like a long-term timeline that they're looking at, typically they're going to be more invested in growth. I just from what I've seen, that's not always the case, but that just seems to be the case. And so you might have more opportunity or more leeway to kind of fully redesign a process or build a process or stand up like I did, like manufacturing, like building basically, and create something from scratch. That's usually more the time when you'll get to step in and help with that, or at least suggest that and see, test the waters a little bit and see what the appetite is for that. Um, that's what I would say for those longer holds. You really need to understand management vision. And I haven't spent a lot of time talking about that, but getting buy-in from the management team is also very, very important. Like if you need buy-in from the people on the floor to actually execute, but you need the management buy-in. Otherwise, you're also like the process might work for a little bit, but it's going to stall at some point if they don't believe in it.
You need that
So
executive support.
yes.
Yep.
And the interesting thing with PE is when I say management, I mean the company's management. But on top of that, if a PE brings you in, the firm that owns it, you might need their buy-in as well, along with the management within the business, along with the people on the ground floor.
Yeah, I think that kind of brings us to that topic of collaboration and communication. And you talked about a lot of different stakeholders and being able to balance, being able to listen, but also align on like, hey, upper management says this, so you kind of have to drive some of those initiatives like down to the shop floor, and then you could probably get some feedback from the shop floor to feed it back up to management. So I know it's probably a very difficult position. I could imagine, like if you're in the middle and you have all these different, I would say, opinions coming at you. So how do you kind of sort through that information and filter it and then deliver it concisely to the different stakeholders so that everybody's like moving in the same direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me the best thing to do there is, again, you kind of need to understand the point of view of who you're speaking to. And something that someone told me at GE when I was doing that internal consulting program on my second review gave me really good advice that you should try to write down ahead of time. If you have time to do this, you should try and write down ahead of time what questions you think they're going to ask you. So I had built a couple of presentation slides and was showing it to him to review. And he asked me, what do you think they're going to ask you based on this slide? And I had no idea. I hadn't even wrapped my head around that. And that was really a really good learning lesson, because kind of trained me when even before you build anything to communicate to someone, you need to understand where they're coming from and what they're looking for out of the conversation so that you can construct it for them to understand and break it down. And that's really the key, I think, when you're talking to a private equity investment team. They're going to want to talk about the financial impact, maybe the vision of how what you're doing is going to impact long-term the growth or long-term the cost. If you're talking to a management team, they probably want to know, is this realistic? Is it stable? Or is my team going to be able to run with this and execute it? If you're talking to the people on the floor, you kind of need to help them understand this is for your benefit. This is how it's going to make your life easier. This is how it's going to actually improve the overall output, which is one of your metrics. So depending on who you're talking to, you just have to think about where they're coming from and what they're going to be thinking when you deliver that information.
This is very much a design thinking mindset, and being empathetic with those that you're working with, because you have to take the time to understand, well, if I'm trying to build a solution because I think it's right to do it in this fashion, and it's not actually in the direction of the goal that they're establishing, or the goal that the C-level suites want, or the goal that the people working on the ground floor want, then we're going to go through this exercise all over again. I think, what you're describing is those opportunities and taking advantage of those opportunities that you have to connect with people. So that collaboration and communicative environment, but in a way that allows you to deliver a solution that is geared toward what their concerns were, what their questions were, what they see the bottlenecks, the issues being in their workflow. And that's a very, I think that's something that takes a lot of time and training to recognize. And so, I think it speaks to the experiences that you've had, but also how you've taken each of those opportunities to really understand what is it that people really want. Because although someone may say, I want a dashboard, their solution may not actually be a dashboard, because that's not what what they're looking for is transparency in these three categories. You don't need a dashboard for that, but that's the first thing that comes to people's mind. So you're kind of helping craft the solution, taking in all of these different viewpoints.
Yeah,
you said it better than I said it.
Yeah, I think the message here is really to know your audience and being able to communicate with them in a way that they understand where you're coming from, and you have to demonstrate like where they're at so that you can kind of meet in the middle or whatever. I do think that there is it's definitely an art that you develop over time, and the content may be the same, but there's an art of delivery, right? So how you talk to somebody on the shop floor is not the same way that you would talk to somebody in an investment firm versus like somebody who's like a middle manager. And being able to, I think, toggle in between those different levels of management really allow you to come up with that central idea of what everybody's trying to move towards. I think I kind of want to pivot to that topic of design thinking and empathy, and there is the time element that you mentioned like way early on in our conversation, right? So I think there is. Imagine if you had a limited amount of time, you could get everybody's opinion and incorporate it into your process. But unfortunately, we do not have unlimited time, resources and money. So, when you have these tight timelines, how do you balance between incorporating those parts of a process that are very important with the timeline that you're given to actually complete this project?
Yeah, that's a good question. Earlier I said that we usually start with the process map. We'll try and validate with people on the floor very quickly if that's what's actually happening, and by observing very quickly. If you don't have a lot of time, I think the next step is you kind of identify just the area to scope in out of that. And what I mean by that is if they receive in material daily and it's flowing, as an example, step A, it's flowing through easily. Step B is where you're seeing stuff pile up. That would be where you would go target. And then from that point, you would probably pull in whatever management owner would be there, and then the process owner, like the one or two people that are actually working that area on a shop floor, for an example. So I think you kind of have to very quickly scope in and hone in on the area that needs improvement, if it's one specific area or if a handful. That way you can get buy-in from those specific people that it'll directly impact right away or as quickly as possible. And then from there, it's important to circle back to the full team to say, this is the change we're going to make. This, we're going to be willing to iterate on it, but we need to start, tomorrow on this change. We need your guys' feedback on if this is working or not. And then just make quick iterations from there, because planning is very important. But if you're on a very short time span and you have only a few weeks, you need to make the change very quickly and just see how it works. As long as you're not going to break something to complete disrepair, it's fine to make a change with the team's buy-in and see how it works, and then iterate from there, from their feedback.
And I think that's your Lean Six Sigma talking right there. That you almost want to understand where the flaws are in your new design as quickly as possible. Obviously, you don't want to set up a design that if it fails, it could tank 50% of your profits or your product or something like that. So I think what you're describing also is sort of when you come up with these designs that they look good in theory, they look good on paper, and you set to test them, you're testing them on small pilot batches before you decide, okay, this is what we want to do. So you kind of take the wrench and tighten up all these loose ends and say, okay, well, you know what, the delivery of that result, did not really go the way that we wanted to. So perhaps if we modify the data to come out this way, it'll allow us an easy flow into the next process. So I think, I guess, can you talk a little bit about how, Lean Six Sigma also has kind of worked your mind into how you approach these process improvement, these solutions, and the iterations?
Yeah, I would say so I got the Six Sigma green belt at GE, and at GE there's a big culture around that piece of things, especially within their manufacturing and operations. But it was actually, even when I was leaving, being moved into their back office functions like finance and stuff. They were using projects to even make those processes better, which is good to see because it doesn't just apply to manufacturing. It's easier to see because it's a process that's right in front of you versus some of this stuff's done via email or like online using dashboards or tools, but it can be applied across the board. And that's kind of the mentality we were trying to build at GE. And there's like obviously several process steps: define, DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. All those steps are important. I think the one that we spent a lot of time on is the control piece. If you're not in control after the fact, then it tells you something's still wrong with the process. And there's a lot of different ways you can see that control, but you have to track whatever key metric that you want to see and make sure that it's within the confines of what you want to see. If that's a tolerance level, if it's an output, if it's a number of emails per day, whatever it is. And you really just have to measure that for a substantial period of time, because anything can look in control for a week or two, but you need to see, make sure that it's going to stay in control. So for projects where it's very short term, you can imagine it's hard to get to that point where you can analyze and measure that control for several months. What we would usually do is set up a tool or a process so they can keep measuring it and show if something is going out of line. And then within the SOP, we usually write audits so you can see within each step, do a quick audit, the management team, usually one or two questions, so they can go back and look, is this process working? Can I answer these two questions with yes? Then yes, it's working. So we try to still, even though we're not there necessarily to watch the control phase is very, very important. So we try to build a tool or a way for them to still be kind of fact checking for themselves. Is this still in control? Are we hitting what we need to? Is something broken with this process again? So.
Yeah, I think that's a super important design element of control is making it sustainable. And, once you guys are out of the project and it's complete, you don't want to be dealing with the same problem again, and developing something for a way for clients to be able to track their performance, I think is key, and making it easy to understand so that it's not only just the management team, but also the people on the floor maybe have some visibility on, hey, we're actually getting better over time, and demonstrating that all the work that we've put into this effort is making a big difference on the output.
It's definitely a win wherever you can to visually show it to the team, for sure. So that's in that last project, we developed a tool that tracked their output, and they were more than double by the end. So it's just, they liked seeing that every day to see if they were hitting their new target, and to see, look how far we've came. Because when you get involved in the day to day, sometimes it's hard to pick your head up and see, wow, look at how far we've came. We've improved this by so much. It's hard to see that sometimes. You have blinders on because you're still seeing things going wrong or little tweaks that you need to make here and there. But sometimes you need to stop and reflect on, wow, like this is great. We need to keep moving forward, but look at what we've done so far.
So, Jon, I want to step before all of these things, all of these moments in your career, and I'm always curious to understand those, that point or those series of points that made you start to think in this direction of improving the way that we do things, of becoming more efficient. Was that a factor of just being within that environment at GE? Did you pick up a little bit of that previously, or was there something in your previous work that kind of drove you nuts, and in other words, and thinking, oh my gosh, there has to be a new way to do this. How did you fall into this space?
Yeah, I would say so. My first 2 years at GE, I was doing an operations leadership program. So you basically are in a functional role and you move across different parts of the operation. So I was in procurement, which is kind of like the front end, buying stuff from suppliers and they feed it into the jet engine. Um, I did a supervisor role where you're managing a team building a part for the engine. And then I was the assembly leader in my third role where you assemble the full engine and deliver it to customers. So during that period, that's where I kind of started to see, on each level, because all of these things ended up being connected. I didn't know that's how it worked out, but it is how it worked out. And by the time I got to my third role, which was the assembly one, I was seeing issues still with a supplier that I managed in the first rotation, delivering us parts to me late. And it was something I couldn't really point to someone else. I could point to myself because I managed that same supplier a year and a half before. So I wouldn't say I really developed it right away, to be honest. We made some improvements in each of those roles as like the team, but I wasn't really in a mindset where, wow, I want to change all these things. I was just trying to put my head down and execute. Once I got to that third role and kind of saw things coming together, like how everything was flowing, I was like, man, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done this. And all these things would have helped fix the problems I'm seeing now downstream from the current team I'm on. So that's where I kind of had like the light bulb moment, I would say. And from there, that's what made me want to join that second GE program. And their thinking was way more, even from day one, asking questions, trying to understand why processes weren't working, what's my opinion on how it could work. So that's when I really started to build it. When I started to notice it was those first 2 years, and then kind of went from there on refining it.
Yeah, I think I don't want to speak for Oscar, but even for myself, being a part of like a manufacturing plant, from the start of designing and installing equipment to operating and maintaining it to decommissioning and disposing of assets, you get a feel for, if you make a mistake early on, you can really feel the pain in the next phase, and
It
it shows up,
yeah.
and having that appreciation for like putting in those good practices early on really makes a significant difference throughout the whole life cycle of the plant, not only from a like physical like equipment standpoint, but also from like a people perspective. When you see somebody work on something and they enjoy working on it, that means a lot more than getting something like that's crappy and then you push it downstream and somebody's working on it and goes, who thought of this? And like, why would this be a good idea? And that really, is one of the main drivers for myself in looking at not only process improvement, but just looking at operations as a whole and trying to find these bottlenecks and gaps. We'll be right back after a quick break. Is your team constantly fighting fires? Are you struggling with productivity and think it's due to inefficiency in your operations? These challenges can be difficult to measure, but not impossible. Sigma Lab Consulting can help you define and prioritize the issues that are negatively impacting your team. We partner with stakeholders to redesign workflows so you can work more efficiently. Find out more at sigmalabconsulting.com.
I think you're hitting on some of those major points that, everything that we do at work in our own workplace, it's all connected. And sometimes we have groups of folks that like to think that their process is so unique that it's just for them. But as soon as they have completed their end of the work, it goes on to the next stage. And if you're not giving that work the care that it deserves with the timing that was planned, when you pass it on to the next stage, it's almost like there's a little bit of a slow tick. The ball isn't really rolling. It's kind of almost halted, and then you have to kind of pick it up again. And Lawrence, you talked about these multiple stages of and you, John, as well, that we started with procurement and then we went here and then we went here. How often do we see our timelines completely obliterated, and our solution is fixing something at the end of the pipeline because that is where the delivery happens. That issue started 6 months ago when we were 6 weeks behind because we didn't do 1, 2, and 3. And now that we're all the way up at the front, all the way, toward the delivery, we're at mile 25 of this marathon. And now we want to shrink a process that is 3 weeks in duration to 4 days. And it's like you're asking to decrease the process duration by 80%, and the people at the very front of this process increased their duration by 200% or what have you. And we have to constantly, when I'm talking to folks, I let them know, yes, this is your process and this is your data, but it's not only for you. Someone else is going to pick this up. So however tight you can make your analysis, your the work that you're putting in, understand that we're going to feel it, 4 stages down the road. It's such an important part for us to really think about that we're not just working in our function. You are parts of a machine. You are parts of a team. And the early work is just as important as the work right at the delivery, because those things that we want to, let's just push this on. It's not ideal, but let's just push this on. And then you get to the end and go, well, why didn't it work? Well, we already assessed 6 months ago that this wasn't ideal. So why is our expectation at the end that this is going to be a home run?
And it's easy for people my example with procurement, for instance, people in the beginning of the process, if they don't see the end potentially from where they're sitting, it's easier to make a change from their perspective to benefits a portion of what they're doing, but downstream and overall for the business or the process, it's actually worse. And it's easy, really, really easy if your process is segmented and touches many hands or many different people or processes throughout an organization, to make a decision in your own silo that's going to impact the full process.
Absolutely. It's the wink links in a train are not the different carts, the different processes. It's the handoffs, those connecting pieces. That's the weak spot. And whenever we change these processes, we have to understand, are we also changing the delivery? Because the next stage is expecting it to look like X. And if we send them something that looks like Y, it's just going to slow down the process. So we have to really take that into consideration, not just making changes for ourselves, but understanding what does that change to the level that is just outside of us, the process just downstream and the process just upstream. We really have to take those into consideration.
Yeah. So Jon, I want to bring this, first round of conversation to a close. But before we do that, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your younger self, when you started on this journey? And, does that advice also apply to somebody who's coming out of school, who's also looking to get into management consulting? How would you advise that younger Jon or a young person trying to get into this field?
Yeah, I would say the biggest piece of it is having an appetite to learn every day. If you lose that, I don't think it'll be the right area for you to be in, because that's what you're going to do each day. So a big key to that is, listening, absorbing the information, forming an opinion, but trying to find out what their opinion is first, and work on developing the communication skills, knowing how to talk to each level of the business, as we spoke about. But yeah, those would be my big things. Is having an appetite to learn each day is really, really the most important, and trying to look at a process holistically as opposed to just your little piece of it.
Amen to that. Preach on. I know it's not Sunday, but preach.
Yeah, Jon. So how, if people are interested in learning more about what you do and about the firm you're at, how can they reach out to you?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. Yeah.
Awesome.
LinkedIn.
We'll make sure we'll get that into the show notes. If you guys want to contact Jon, have a little conversation with him, understand a little bit more about what he's doing. He's definitely dropped some value here, and you're hearing it from a third party, not just from myself and from Lawrence, who live and breathe this type of thinking and this type of connecting folks to really empower them to not take work that doesn't make sense. It's not that's difficult for no reason. Really take charge and take that opportunity to to build your career, to build your credibility as being an employee that wants to improve not just themselves but the people around them as well. So, Jon, thank you for coming on, and it was great talking to you and learning more about the private equity space. And I think a lot more listeners are going to really jive with the messaging that you brought forth today. Probably something that they were not expecting when they heard that there was somebody with private equity experience coming on board. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks you, Jon.
For having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Want to get updates on new episodes, tips, and industry trends? Hit the subscribe button on our podcast page or head to our website and sign up for our newsletter. If you want to support the show or be a guest, send us an email at leanbydesign@sigmalabconsulting.com with your idea. You've been listening to Lean by Design podcast, music by Alex Grohl and play sound of Pixabay, produced and hosted by Oscar Gonzalez and Lawrence Wong of Sigma Lab Consulting. Until next time, work smarter before you work harder. Where's my mouse?